What's up everybody, it's PokéRadar, and today I am back with a follow-up to my Shiny Guide video. If you haven't watched the previous video, I highly recommend doing so now, as it goes into detail about what are essentially the basics for this video. But as a quick recap, in the last video I've explained how the Pokemon games decide for any Pokemon encountered or hatched, whether that Pokemon is shiny or not, using its IVs in Generation 2, or its personality value, sometimes shortened as PID, since Generation 3. In this video then, I'll be going over each of the games and explain what methods can be employed to raise your chance of getting a shiny Pokemon above the standard 1 in 8192 of the 2D games or 1 in 4096 of the 3D games. Quick note before we start, while most of these methods are what you would use to shiny hunt, this might not be the best video to follow if you want to start shiny hunting yourself, as A, I'll be focusing more on the technical aspects of these methods and how they raise a shiny chance, and B, I haven't performed all these methods myself, so I'm nowhere near an expert at them, and my explanations might be a bit lackluster. But with all that out of the way, let's start with the generation that introduced shiny Pokemon, Gen 2. While it may be surprising to some of you, the original Johto games do have ways to get Pokemon with a higher of normal chance of being shiny. The first is due to the fact that when breeding Pokemon, IVs are passed down from one of the parents, either Ditto when breeding with one, and otherwise the one with the opposite gender as the offspring. The Pokemon hatching from the egg will always have the same defense IV as the passing parent, and either the same special IV or 8 points away from it, with a 50-50 chance for either one. The attack and special IV are still generated randomly, with HP being derived from the other four, just like with wild encounters. So what happens when a shiny Pokemon is the one passing down those IVs? That would make the offspring's defense IV 10, and its special IV either 10 or 2. So defense will always stand in the shiny qualifications, special has a 50% chance of doing so, and, just like wild Pokemon, attack has a 50% chance as well, and speed a 16th of a chance. This totals in a shiny chance that has barely been reached since, with an average of 1 out of only 64 Pokemon being shiny. Now the fact that the defense IV is passed down in breeding, along with one of only 2 options for the special IV, makes it so that any bred Pokemon will either have the 1 in 64 chance of being shiny, or not be able to be shiny at all, depending on whether the passing parent has the right defense and special IVs, and the easiest way of telling is if the parent is shiny itself. But breeding's not the only thing. The odd egg is a gift egg found in Pokemon Crystal, and its name is certainly fitting. It's the only gift egg in the games that can hatch into one of multiple Pokemon, with the result being unknown to the player until the egg hatches. Additionally, the Pokemon that hatches from it will have one of only 2 sets of IVs. One set has all IVs set to 0, and the other puts the attack IV at 2, defense, special, and speed at 10, with HP staying at 0 due to it being calculated from the other ones. Did the latter sound familiar? Well, that's because it's the set of IVs that would result in a shiny Pokemon. In the Japanese version of Crystal, in which the odd egg could only be obtained with an event through the long and active mobile system GB, each of the 2 sets of IVs had a 50-50 chance of being used, creating the astronomically low half of a chance of hatching a shiny. The international versions, in which the odd egg is normally available, have reduced the shiny chance to only 14%, but that's still more than 1 in 10. And lastly, from the widest selection of Pokemon and the lowest chance, to the narrowest possible selection and highest possible chance. When you surf to the middle of the Lake of Rage, you find a static encounter for a Gyarados. Said Gyarados has a predetermined set of IVs, 14 attack and 10 defense, special, and speed, which is of course a set of IVs for a shiny Pokemon, and that's a 100% chance. And yes, I will be mentioning guaranteed shiny Pokemon, as they technically have a higher than normal chance of being shiny. On to Generation 3, which has nothing. No ways of increasing shiny chance, no guaranteed shinies, nada. The personality value system cancels out the breeding method, and the odd egg doesn't exist either. You're essentially stuck with the 18192 odds. So let's jump right into Generation 4, starting with Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. The 4th generation was the first one to be released for the Nintendo DS, the first Nintendo handheld to natively support wireless communication and Wi-Fi connections. As such, the Global Trade System, or GTS, was set up to allow for, to the surprise of no one, global trades. As a small incentive for players to use the GTS, Game Freak decided to implement a strange little mechanic, where if two Pokemon originating from games of different languages are bred, their offspring would have its personality value re-rolled multiple times, in an attempt to get one that would result in a shiny Pokemon. Due to this mechanic being first documented by Game Freak co-founder Junichi Masuda, it's commonly referred to as the Masuda Method. In Generation 4, the PID is re-rolled 4 times, which, when added to the original one, creates a chance of 5 in 8192, or approximately 1 in 60 and 38 of getting a shiny from each egg hatched with this method. Additionally, after unlocking the National Pokédex, the Sinnoh games allow you to get the PokéRadar, an item that allows you to chain encounters for a specific wild Pokemon by defeating or capturing it. Some Pokemon that can be encountered that way can't be normally found in the region. As your chain grows, the game has a growing chance of forcing the wild Pokemon to be shiny by constructing a PID that would satisfy the shiny calculation, and showing it as a sparkle in the shaking grass patch. The chance of creating such shiny patch can be calculated with this formula, capping at a chain of 40 and a chance of 327 in 65,536, or just about 1 in 200 for every patch. A non-shiny patch will still have the normal 1 in 8192 chance of being shiny. And now for Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The Masuda method stays exactly the same, but the PokéRadar no longer exists. Additionally, the red Gyarados of the Lake of Rage makes a return with mechanics similar to the shiny forcing of the PokéRadar. This supposedly, I couldn't find any confirmation of this one specifically. Moving over to Gen 5, Black and White's only contributions to shiny fans was an additional personality value roll with the Masuda method, raising its shiny chance to 6 in 8192, or approximately 1 shiny out of every 1365 hatched eggs. Black 2 and White 2, however, added an item that nowadays is almost a must for any shiny hunter, the Shiny Charm. After registering every single Pokemon, except some mythicals, into the National Pokédex, the player can pick up this item that, by merely existing in the bag, adds 2 PID rolls to every single Pokemon, whether it's a wild encounter, static encounter, though some of them are straight up shiny locked, or a hatched egg, basically making the base shiny rate in the game 3 in 8192, or about 1 in 2730. In addition, the rolls from the Shiny Charm are added on top of those from the Masuda method, making the shiny rate of a hatchling bred with the Masuda method while a player has the Shiny Charm 8 in 8192, or 1 shiny for every 1024 eggs hatched. Another noteworthy thing in these games, when completing the regional decks, you can get a permit to get to the nature preserve where a shiny Haxorus resides. Plus, when defeating Benga in the Black Tower in Black 2, he awards you a shiny Gibble. When he's defeated in the White Tree Hollow in White 2, he gives out a shiny Dratini. Generation 6 is when things really started picking up for shiny Pokemon. Not only did the base rate for a single PID go up to 1 in 4096, making Masuda Method's rate about 1 in 682, the Shiny Charm odds around 1 in 1365 and their combined rate 1 in 512, but additionally, every single game since X and Y featured a way to raise shiny chance, usually by chaining encounters in some way. First in X and Y is the return of the PokéRadar, with the same mechanics of the shiny patch chance and the other patches having the 1 in 4096 odds. Second, every Pokemon spawned in the Friend Safari in Cloud City receives 5 personality value plus 2 with the Shiny Charm, making their shiny chance 5 or 7 in 4096, or around 1 in 819 or 585. Another mechanic introduced in these games is called consecutive fishing, or chain fishing. For every fishing encounter obtained without moving or failing to get a bite, 2 extra PID rolls will occur for each link built in the chain. So the normal 1 for the first encounter, 3 for the second, 5 for the third, and so on, capping out 41 rolls starting with the 21st encounter, having a chance of just over 1 in 100 Pokemon being shiny on average. To make it easier to chain consecutively, the probability of successfully getting a bite rises for each side of the tile fished on that has a rock in it, where if all 3 sides, the fourth is where the player is, are blocked, you'll get a bite every time you cast the rod. And of course, the Shiny Charm adds 2 extra rolls, getting you to a 1 in 95 chance at the cap. While the PokéRadar was once again removed from the remakes along with the Prince Safari, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire introduced a new hunting method incorporated into the DexNav section of the PokéNav. The DexNav shows you the different Pokemon species you've seen or caught that are found in your area. For any of them that were caught, it allows you to search for them, allowing you to spawn in a hidden encounter for them. You know, those times where Pokemon would peek out of the grass and you have to sneak towards it to encounter it? Catching or defeating those hidden encounters would build up a chain, which would increase the chance that the Pokemon encountered would be forced to be shiny, while keeping the natural shiny rate the same. If for whatever reason a hidden Pokemon appears but isn't battled and defeated or captured, the chain breaks. The calculation for the shiny forcing is a little complicated, so try to stay with me. The game starts by generating a random number between 0 and 9,999, and checks if it's lower than a target value, which is based on the search level for that Pokemon species or how many times it was encountered in the wild. The target value starts at 0 and increases by 6 for every search level until 100, 2 for each level from then until 200, and 1 for every search level from that point. Although the check is actually performed on the target value divided by 100, so the chance for the check to succeed goes up rather slowly. However, the check could be re-rolled if certain conditions are met, and they stack as well. There's a 4% chance that 4 extra rolls will just happen. If the player has the shiny charm, 2 rerolls occur for every encounter. When reaching a chain of 50 encounters, 5 extra rolls are added, and finally a chain of 100 gives 10 extra checks, meaning that on a 100 chain with a shiny charm, the check will be performed 13 times on a single Pokemon, 17 if you're lucky. Pokemon Sun and Moon have introduced us to the SOS Battle mechanic, where wild Pokemon are able to call others, usually of the same species or evolution line, to help them in battle. The shiny rate increase method lies within this mechanic. If Pokemon are continuously called for help in the same battle, a chain is built up. Chain lengths 11, 21, and 31 each increase the amount of PIDs generated for each Pokemon that comes to help by 4, stacking with a shiny charm to have a max of 15 personality values for every Pokemon, with a shiny chance of 15 in 4096, or about 1 in 273. The chain counter, responsible for which bonuses are active, does reset at 255 calls though, and starts counting up from 0 again. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, on the other hand, the chain counter never resets, and bonuses stay until the battle ends, though only 1 Pokemon is called in per battle unless the Adrenaline Orb item is used. In Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee versions, when catching multiple Pokemon of the same species without any of them fleeing, a catch combo is built up, which rewards the player with various enhancements to the chained Pokemon, including extra rolls to their personality value. A combo of at least 11 catches grants 3 extra rolls, at 21 you start getting 7 rerolls, and from 31 you get 11 additional rolls. Unfortunately, the rerolls only apply to the first Pokemon of the changed species that spawns every time the catch combo is incremented, so you need to continue catching Pokemon in order to get the heightened odds. Rerolls that apply to all Pokemon are the 2 from the shiny charm and 1 from using any lure, which stack with each other and the catch combo ones, with the max chance being 1 in 273 again. Another unfortunate point, as breeding is not available in these games, the Masuda Method does not exist. Pokemon Sword and Shield have what I feel like is a disappointing shiny hunting method. The Pokédex keeps track of the amount of times you defeated or captured each species of Pokemon and displays it as the number battled. The higher the number is, the more likely you are to get an individual of that species with a yellow aura surrounding it. These Pokemon are referred to as brilliant Pokemon, and only they have their personality value rerolled a certain amount of times. After the number battled reaches just 1, brilliant Pokemon would start spawning, with a 1.5% chance to appear, and they would each have a single extra roll. At 20 battles, the spawn rate increases to 2%, at 50 to 2.5%, and they would start having 2 extra rolls. In 100, the spawn rate caps at 3%, with a total of 3 rolls on top of the original, and 200, 300, and 500 each add another PID roll to the brilliant Pokemon spawned, totaling 6 extra rolls for each, and going up to 9 total rolls if the shiny charm is in the player's bag, with a shiny chance being around 1 in 455. Another way to increase the rate at which brilliant Pokemon appear is a somewhat inferior return of chain fishing. To build a fishing chain, the player must reel in a Pokemon with every cast of the rod and defeat them. Failing to reel in a Pokemon, despawning the pool, fleeing the battle by choice or by force, catching the Pokemon, or worst of all, finding a brilliant Pokemon all cause the chain to reset back to 0. Getting a fishing chain of 3 Pokemon would increase the spawn rate of brilliant Pokemon by 2%, a chain of 7 by 5%, a 15 chain is a 10% spawn boost, and finally, managing to get a chain of 25 Pokemon would increase your chance of finding brilliant Pokemon by 25%. But this is a very difficult feat, considering some of the fished Pokemon can be brilliant themselves. The reason why I feel like this method is a disappointment, and this is going to be a bit of a rant, is mostly the comparison to other methods, and to what was promised on the official Pokemon website. Brilliant Pokemon give you shiny odds that are identical to the Masuda method, but only after defeating the Pokemon you want to get 300 times, and they appear only 3% of the time. It does pass these odds at 200 battles later, but the 3% spawn rate remains. The raid's odds are so low and so infrequent, the Masuda method is just better in almost every single way, especially by having their odds for every hatch. In addition, around the game's release, an article on the official Pokemon website explained the mechanic and made it sound like every Pokemon of the battled species gets the raised odds. So when people started noticing that the odds only occurred 3% of the times at best, it was considered for a while to be a glitch, though after update it would stay the same, and people, including me, gave up hope for a fix. It wasn't until a Twitter user by the name of Anubis, who is known to gather a lot of data about the different mechanics in the Pokemon games, noticed the similarity between the brilliant Pokemon spawn rate and the raised shiny odds rate, that we got proof of how the mechanic truly works. I'll put a link to his Twitter thread detailing everything in the description if anyone wants to check it out. Be aware that it's a pretty lengthy read with 16 tweets, but the last one is a TLDR. There is another way of getting shinies more easily though. If you purchase the expansion pass, you can go to the Crown Tundra, where the Max Lair is located. In the Max Lair, players can go on a Dynamax Adventure, where they participate in 4 max raid battles, one after the other, with the final one being against a legendary Pokemon. At the end of the adventure, each player can choose to keep one of the Pokemon they've captured during it, and each of these Pokemon has a 1 in 300 chance of being shiny, 1 in 100 if you have the shiny charm. The Pokemon won't appear in shiny during the adventure though, you'll only be able to know if you got one in the Pokemon selection screen. Moving all that aside though, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have re-implemented the PokéRadar once again, behaving only slightly differently than how it did in Diamond and Pearl. While the shiny patch chance still caps at a chain of 40, said chance is about 1 in 99 rather than 1 in 200. The shiny odds for each link of the chain can be found here, once again thanks to Anubis on Twitter. In addition, the Grand Underground has Diglett and Dugtrio spread around the many corners and intersections outside the hideaways. When the player comes near them, the Pokemon will dig out of the way and leave behind a small sparkle or 3. Collecting 40 of these sparkles will initiate the Lightstone bonus, which adds an extra PAD roll to each Pokemon encountered in the hideaways for 4 minutes. One downgrade that BDSP has over previous games is that the shiny charm only affects Pokemon hatched from eggs and not from any other way. The Hisui region of Pokemon Legends Arceus has a phenomenon known as mass outbreaks, where 10 to 15 Pokemon of the same species spawn in one spot. The Pokemon of such outbreaks have the incredible bonus of 25 additional PAD rolls, with a shiny chance of a little over 1 in 157. Massive mass outbreaks also exist after the first content update of the game, in which between 10 to 15 mass outbreaks form in one area, with less Pokemon in each and only 12 rerolls for each Pokemon, a chance of around 1 in 315. The Hisui region's Pokédex is also one of a kind. Instead of a single catch of each Pokemon being enough, research has to be done with each species to complete its entry. Once every Pokemon's research level reaches 10, only then can the player obtain the shiny charm, although it does generate 3 extra PAD rolls, unlike other games. In addition, reaching research level 10 for any species gives an additional rolls for any individual from that species, and completing all research tasks for it generates 3 PADs on top of the original. And all methods stack as well, making a mass outbreak Pokemon with a perfected Dex entry while the player has the shiny charm have a whopping 32 rolls for its personality value, and a shiny chance of 1 in 128.
Future errors here, as I forgot to mention something. During the game, people around Jubilife Village will give you requests that can be completed for various rewards, including items, shop enhancements, and sometimes Pokémon. When unlocking request number 19, a peculiar Ponyta, a fixed spawn for a shiny Ponyta appears in the Horseshoe Plains. Because it must be captured in order to complete the request, if it flees or is knocked out, simply going to Jubilife Village and coming back causes said Ponyta to respawn.
Like in Let's Go, breeding is not available in this game, and so is the Masuda Method. Lastly, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet saw the continuation of mass outbreaks. Only instead of giving you less than 20 Pokemon for one species, you get to catch or defeat more than 100 of them, though the amount of outbreaks is limited to a few for every real-world 24 hours. After clearing out 20 to 30 Pokemon from the outbreak by catching or defeating them, even through the new auto battle mechanic, each new Pokemon that spawns gets an additional PAD roll, and when another 20 to 30 Pokemon are cleared, another PAD roll is added for a total of 3. The game will tell you every time you clear enough Pokemon. After this point, the player is able to despawn all the Outbreaks Pokemon by starting a picnic or leaving the area, and when returning, the outbreak will continue from the same point when it comes to the clear count, but with new spawns. Meal powers are new to these games, allowing the player to activate bonuses by eating various foods, mostly sandwiches. Most meal powers have 3 levels of strength, including the one I want to focus on, Sparkling Power. When this power is active, it gives the player an extra PAD roll to all Pokemon spawned for each level of the power, up to a total of 4 PADs on any random wild Pokemon. And as always, when it comes to extra PAD rolls, all methods stack with each other and with the Shiny Charm that has returned to its normal 2 extra PADs, for a total of 8 personality values for a Pokemon in an outbreak with enough cleared Pokemon, while the player has a level 3 Sparkling Power active and the Shiny Charm. The chances for such Pokemon to be shiny are 1 in 512. And that's it! These are all the ways in which Pokemon games raise the odds for shiny Pokemon. If there's anything you want more details about, don't hesitate to ask in the comments and I'll do my best to elaborate further. Thank you guys so much for watching, I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more Pokemon content. If you did subscribe, make sure to follow me on Twitter with a link down in the description for updates on my channel and my life in general. I post it whenever I upload a video and before I go live, so it really is the best place to get updated. And with that being said, that's all I have for today, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.